Okay, so today we're diving into something called the Model Context Protocol.
MCP.
Yeah, MCP. And this might sound kind of technical at first glance, but
It is.
yeah, it is, but it's actually all about making AI assistants way more capable.
Much more connected to the world around them.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to do it in a way that hopefully doesn't make your head spin.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So our mission in this deep dive is really just to get a solid understanding of what MCP is and, what it can do.
Yeah, what it could do and how.
Yeah, and how it's being used right now. So kind of a shortcut to being in the know about this fast-moving part of the AI world.
Definitely. I think one of the things that struck me the most as I was reading about this was, this is moving so fast.
Yeah.
It's changing every day.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be really valuable just to get a snapshot in time.
Absolutely. And we've got some great sources to pull from today. We've got articles from Andreessen and Horowitz.
Anthropic.
Of course, Anthropic themselves.
Microsoft. Huge players.
And the folks over at Hugging Face. Yeah. So a good range of perspectives.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into this. The core problem that the MCP is trying to address seems to be the way that AI models interact with the outside world.
Yeah.
Right, so your data, various software tools, APIs, all that stuff.
Yeah, like right now, it sounds like connecting these different pieces has been kind of a fragmented process.
Yeah.
A lot of custom work for each connection.
Yeah, like every time you wanted to do something different, you had to write a new connector and plug it in. And,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And all of our sources are really pointing to these fragmented integrations.
Yeah.
It's like if an AI needed to access a database,
Right.
a tailored connection had to be built.
Right.
If it needed to connect to an email service, you needed another unique connector.
Right.
So this bespoke approach, it was described in one article as like a messy ad hoc affair.
Right.
It just wasn't really scaling well.
It wasn't efficient and it wasn't elegant. Okay. So that's where MCP comes in. And it's being described as an open protocol. So what does protocol actually mean in this context, and why is it a deal that it's open?
So a protocol in the tech world is basically just a set of rules
Right.
that allow different systems to talk to each other.
Okay.
Right. And the open part means that those rules are publicly accessible,
Right.
not controlled by a single company or entity.
Okay.
So MCP is designed to be a standard interface for execution, data fetching, and tool calling for AI models.
Okay.
And so Anthropic and Microsoft actually had a really good analogy.
Okay.
They said it's basically like a USB-C port
Right.
for AI applications.
Okay.
So just like USB-C offers that universal way to connect various devices,
Yeah.
MCP wants to offer that universal way for AI to interact with all these different sources and tools.
Right. Right. I mean, that makes total sense. Instead of having, 50 different cables behind your desk, you have one that does everything. Yeah. Okay. I also noticed that MCP was inspired by something called the Language Server Protocol, or LSP. What's LSP, and how does MCP kind of build on top of that?
So LSP has been very successful in the world of code editors.
Okay.
So when you're writing code and your editor makes suggestions or flags errors,
Right.
that's often LSP in action.
Oh,
It's mostly reactive.
Yeah.
So the code editor, which is the client, is querying a language server based on what you're doing as a user.
Okay.
MCP kind of steals this client-server architecture,
Okay.
but introduces something called an agent-centric execution model.
Okay.
This means that MCP is designed to support AI workflows that are more autonomous.
Okay, so it's not just waiting for input from the user. It can actually decide, okay, I need this information, let me go get it.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
decide what tools to use,
Wow.
in what order, and how to kind of combine them to get to a specific goal.
Really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like with LSP, it's more like a helpful coding assistant that just reacts to what you're typing. But with MCP, it's like giving the AI the ability to be proactive and decide, okay, I'm going to go use these tools to do this.
Exactly. And I think what's interesting is that fundamental components are pretty similar.
Okay.
So you have MCP clients, which are the AI applications themselves,
Okay.
things like Claude Desktop,
Right.
or even just an IDE, and they connect to MCP servers.
Okay.
And those servers are really lightweight programs that expose very specific capabilities.
Okay.
So you could imagine a server that knows how to talk to a database.
Right.
Another one that can interact with an API, maybe one that can access files stored locally.
Right.
And so the MCP client acts as this intermediary,
Right.
taking requests from the AI model and routing them to the right server.
Gotcha. So it's like a translator and a dispatcher all in one.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, cool. And it looks like Anthropic is really kind of trying to kickstart this ecosystem, they announced a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah, they really are. They've introduced kind of three main things.
All right.
First is the MCP specification itself, which basically lays out all the rules of the protocol.
Okay.
And then they also released some SDKs to help developers actually create MCP integrations.
Okay.
And then the second big thing is that they've added local MCP server support directly in Claude Desktop.
Okay.
And then the third thing is that they've actually created this open source repository where developers can share and discover MCP servers.
Awesome. I mean, that's the beauty of open source, right? You get that community involvement and everybody benefits.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've got the foundational rules, you've got the tools to implement them, and then you've got a place to go to find the pieces that work together.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so one thing that I was curious about is MCP like specific to any one AI model?
No.
Like Claude? Or is it more universal?
That's actually a key aspect that was highlighted in every single one of the articles that we read.
Okay.
MCP is designed to be model agnostic.
Okay. So the idea is that any AI model,
Yeah.
whether it's Claude, GPT-4, or something else entirely,
Could use it.
could potentially be adapted to use MCP.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like future-proofing it in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a good understanding of what MCP is aiming to achieve.
Right.
Now let's get into the how. Like, how does it actually work in practice?
Sure.
And there's this concept of dynamic discovery that sounds pretty important.
Yeah, that's one of the big things. I think dynamic discovery means that AI agents,
Okay.
they don't need to be pre-programmed with knowledge of every single tool that's out there.
Right.
They can actually automatically detect MCP servers
okay.
and figure out what they can do.
Oh, wow.
So for example, imagine a new MCP server gets created that interacts with a specific CRM.
Okay.
An AI agent using MCP
Yeah.
could identify that new server and start using its functions
Right.
without any manual configuration or custom code for that specific CRM.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, one of the sources actually used that exact example.
Really?
They talked about a new CRM MCP server that was immediately recognized and used.
Wow. So it really simplifies that whole process of adding new tools.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is like the typical sequence of events when an AI wants to use a tool through MCP?
So the general workflow is this. First, the AI model decides it needs to access information or perform an action using an external tool.
Right.
Then it formulates a request.
Okay.
The MCP client, which is part of the AI application,
Right.
takes this request and figures out which MCP server can handle it
Right.
and sends it to that server.
Okay.
The server then does its thing,
Yeah.
maybe retrieves data from a database, makes an API call, or executes some other action.
Right.
And then once it has a result, the server sends the response back to the AI model
Gotcha.
through the MCP client.
So it goes AI model to MCP client to server and then back.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think I saw that there were different ways these components can communicate with each other.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What are some of those?
So they mentioned things like STDIO, which is standard input output.
Right.
There's SSE, which is servers and events. This is kind of cool because it lets the server push data to the client
Well, okay.
in almost real time.
Interesting.
And then there's WebSocket, which allows for persistent
Okay.
two-way communication.
Gotcha. So it depends on the specific requirements of what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's get into some actual concrete examples of how this is being used today.
Okay.
And one thing that came up was this idea of MCP clients becoming like everything apps,
Yeah.
which sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a vision that's starting to really happen.
Yeah.
And the big example is Cursor,
Okay.
which is a code editor, but because it can work with MCP,
Okay.
users can install all these different servers. They can basically become any app you want.
Wow.
So if you have a Slack MCP server,
Oh, right.
it can function like a Slack client.
Okay.
If you have a resend server,
Great.
it can send emails.
Okay.
And if you have a replicate server, it can generate images.
All within that same interface?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And what's really powerful, I think, is the ability to orchestrate multiple servers at once.
Okay. How so?
So like you could imagine generating the front-end code for a website,
Okay.
and then in the same interface using an image generation server to create a hero image.
Wow. So you're really stringing these things together to create like a more powerful workflow.
Yeah.
Okay. And the sources also kind of broke down the use cases into two main buckets.
Right.
They were talking about dev-centric workflows and then net new experiences.
Yes.
So let's start with the dev side of things.
Okay.
How is MCP impacting developers right now?
So one of the big things is that it allows developers to stay inside their IDE.
Right.
They don't have to jump between different tools.
Right. Everyone hates that.
Yeah. And so instead of having to like open a separate database management tool,
Yeah.
they can just use a Postgres MCP server directly inside their IDE
Okay.
to run read-only SQL commands.
Right.
Or, they could use an Upstash server to manage their cache indices.
Gotcha. And there was also an example of a tool that could access live environments.
Yes. Browser Tools MCP.
Right. That's what it was called.
Yeah, you can give coding agents access to a live environment.
Right.
And then they can actually inspect console logs
Okay.
and other data for more effective debugging.
So they can actually see what's happening in real time.
Yeah, and one source even gave a specific example of a cursor agent using this to debug code.
Oh, wow. So it's not just theoretical, they're actually using it.
Yeah, it's happening.
Okay, so it's really about bringing the power of all those specialized tools
Yes.
into the developer's workspace.
Right, to where they already are.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, what about the issue of providing more context
Yes.
to the coding assistants themselves?
Yes.
How does MCP help with that?
So traditionally, it was kind of hard to give coding agents the most up-to-date information.
Right.
So what MCP servers can do is they can be created to crawl web pages, or even be automatically generated from documentation or API specs.
Okay, so they can actually ingest that information and
Yeah.
make it usable.
Yeah, so it means developers can set up these servers really quickly
Right.
that give their coding assistants access to all this information.
That's huge.
Yeah, it really reduces the manual work.
Yeah, so less time writing boilerplate code and more time actually using the tools.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about how MCP is beneficial for developers.
Yes.
Now let's get into these net new experiences.
Okay.
It sounds like it goes way beyond just coding.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, a lot of the attention has been on IDEs like Cursor,
Right.
because it appeals to the technical users.
Right.
But that's not the only type of MCP client.
Right.
Cloud Desktop is a great example of an entry point
Yeah.
for people who aren't necessarily developers.
Right.
And so as the protocol evolves, we're going to see more specialized clients
Yeah.
tailored for different business tasks.
So give me an example of what that might look like.
Okay, so imagine customer support agents
Okay.
using an MCP client that's connected to knowledge bases
Right.
and CRM systems.
That's true.
Or marketing teams using clients that can generate copy
Right.
and analyze campaign performance.
So it's really integrating into those workflows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And there was a mention of this @tap command from Highlight.
Oh, yeah.
What's that all about?
So Highlight, which is a platform for monitoring software errors, they've actually created a really cool user interface pattern
Okay.
where you can type @ and invoke any available MCP server.
Okay.
And the cool part is that the output from one server
Yeah.
can be piped into another application.
Okay.
So for example, you could use a server to generate text
Right.
and then use the @add command with a Notion plugin
Right.
and insert it directly into a Notion doc.
Wow.
It's really slick.
That's really cool. And then the other example that I thought was really interesting was the Blender example,
Yes.
using natural language to create 3D model.
Yeah. So that's where the Blender MCP server comes in.
Okay.
It basically acts as the translator
Okay.
between natural language and the specific actions that Blender needs.
Okay.
So someone who doesn't know anything about 3D modeling
Right.
could just describe what they want in plain English,
Okay.
and then the server translates that into modeling steps in Blender.
Wow. That's really democratizing that technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And we're seeing similar things happening with other tools like Unity and Unreal Engine.
Really?
Yeah.
So it seems like 3D modeling is kind of an early adopter of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so it's not just about the individual clients and servers. It sounds like there's this whole ecosystem growing around MCP.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So it's expanding beyond just those core components.
Okay.
We're starting to see MCP marketplaces and server hosting solutions popping up.
Okay.
So companies like Mitlify with their MCPT platform,
Okay.
Smithery, and Open Tools.
Yeah.
They're building platforms that allow developers to discover, share, and contribute new servers.
Okay.
And it's similar to the impact that things like NPM had for JavaScript.
Right.
Or Rapid API for APIs.
So it's making it easy to find the right tools.
Exactly. It's all about discoverability.
Yeah.
And making sure that AI agents can actually find and use the best tools for the job.
Right, because if they can't find them, they can't use them.
Right.
Okay. What about the infrastructure and tooling?
Yeah, that's playing a key role too.
Okay.
We're seeing server generation tools from companies like Mitlify, Stainless, and Speakeasy.
Right.
These tools are trying to streamline the process of creating these services.
Okay.
And then you have hosting solutions like Cloudflare and Smithery that are addressing deployment and scaling.
Right.
And then platforms like Toolbase are making it easier to manage those local first keys and proxies.
Right.
Which is important for security and ease of use. Yeah, absolutely. And the article from Andreessen Horowitz made a point that right now a lot of the high-quality clients are focused on code.
Yeah.
Is that something that we expect to see broaden as the protocol matures?
Yeah, definitely. You know, developers are often the first to embrace these kinds of technologies.
Right.
So as it becomes more widely understood and as more servers become available, we'll see a lot more of those business-centric clients.
Right.
Tailored to specific industries and roles.
Okay, so that's coming down the pike.
Yeah.
What about the servers themselves?
Okay.
I know that a lot of the current MCP servers are local first.
Yeah.
What does that mean, and is that something that will change?
So local first basically means that they're designed to run on the same machine as the AI client.
Okay.
And that's partly due to the early support for things like STDIO and command line interfaces.
Gotcha.
But as the ecosystem grows and we get things like streamable HTTP transport, we'll see more adoption of remote servers.
And Anthropic is working on a server registry and discovery protocol, which will make it easier to find and connect to those remote servers.
So that's coming.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking ahead.
Yes.
If MCP does become like the standard way of doing things, what are some of the bigger implications?
That's a good question.
Because it sounds like it could really change how companies think about their competitive advantage.
Yeah, for sure. The perspective from Andreessen Horowitz was that the competitive edge for companies might shift from focusing on just API design to also curating the best and most discoverable tools.
Okay.
So if an AI agent can go out and find a tool, that means the company providing that tool has to make sure that it's easy to find and that it stands out.
Right. So it's not just about having a good API, it's about making sure that the AI can actually discover and use it.
Exactly.
And then the AI also has to be able to differentiate between all the different options.
Yeah, it's almost like they become these discerning consumers.
Yeah, like AI shoppers.
Yeah, comparing prices and features.
Yeah, and speed and, you know, all these different factors.
Yeah.
And that could lead to some pretty interesting pricing models.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like imagine AI agents choosing tools based on speed and cost. And relevance.
Yeah.
And it could lead to a more market-driven adoption of the best tools.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
Me too.
Yeah, and documentation sounds like it's going to be even more crucial in this kind of environment.
Oh yeah, big time.
Because if the AI can't understand what the tool does, it can't use it.
Right, and so companies will need to create really clear, machine-readable documentation using standards like LLMs on TXT file. And then actually making MCP servers like a standard output from that documentation.
So it's all baked in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also sounds like APIs themselves might not be the best way for AI agents to interact with these tools. That tools are actually a more useful interface.
Yeah, because the mapping from an API to a useful tool for an AI is not always clear.
It's not a one-to-one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me an example.
Okay, so instead of just having like a send email API call, an agent might need something like draft email and send, which is more task-oriented. And it might involve multiple API calls.
Gotcha.
So MCP servers are going to have to focus on encapsulating those use cases.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then the way we host and manage these applications might have to change as well.
Oh, for sure. Because traditional web hosting might not work so well when you have these multi-step workflows that need things like resumability and automatic retries. So hosting providers might need to create new models that can handle this kind of workload. And they'll also have to figure out load balancing across different MCP servers.
To make sure that everything runs smoothly.
Exactly.
Okay, so with any emerging technology, there are always challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
What are some of the key hurdles that MCP still needs to address?
So the sources mentioned a few things.
Okay.
One is hosting and multi-tenancy for servers.
Right.
They also talked about needing robust authentication and authorization.
Yeah, for security.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then maybe even needing a gateway to manage traffic and enforce policies.
Yeah.
Discoverability came up a lot.
Right.
Making it easier for both humans and AIs to find servers.
Right.
Managing the execution environment for different tools.
Okay.
Making sure the client experience is consistent.
Right.
And then better debugging tools.
Right.
But the good news is the community is actively working on all of this.
So these aren't like showstoppers. Right. They're just things that need to be figured out.
Exactly.
Okay. And it sounds like Anthropic is also planning to address some of these issues.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
They've talked about supporting remote servers and OAuth
to
make integrations more secure, launching an official MCP server registry.
Right, to help with that discoverability issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then establishing well-known endpoints.
Okay.
So it's easier for clients to connect.
So they're on top of it.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit and talk about this idea of agentic workflows that we've been hearing so much about.
Yeah.
How does MCP fit into that broader picture?
So MCP itself isn't an agent framework in the same way as something like LangChain.
Right.
Or Crew AI.
Okay.
It's more of a standardized integration layer.
Okay.
Focusing on the action part of agentic systems.
Right.
One source had a really good analogy.
Okay.
He said, if you think of an AI agent as a robot, MCP provides the standardized fingers.
The fingers?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So the fingers are the tools.
Oh, okay.
So it allows the AI to use a variety of tools without having to custom build each one.
Gotcha. So instead of having to create a new finger every time, you have this set of standard fingers that you can use to manipulate the world.
Yeah, and it complements all those orchestration tools.
Okay.
LangChain even created an adapter.
Really?
That lets developers treat MCP servers as LangChain tools.
Wow, so they're all working together.
Yeah, it's all coming together.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, I'm curious about some of the more forward-thinking ideas and potential applications.
Yeah.
What are some of the possibilities that MCP could unlock?
I think the potential is huge.
Yeah.
You know, we could see those really complex multi-step workflows that work across different systems.
Give me an example.
Like, imagine planning an event where the AI manages calendars, bookings, emails, budgets.
Also that one interface.
Yeah.
Wow.
MCP could also help AI agents understand and interact with their environment much better.
Okay.
So controlling smart home devices, interacting with operating systems, or even controlling robots.
Through MCP.
Yeah. And then there's this idea of collaborating agents, or like agent societies.
What does it mean?
So it's where multiple AI agents exchange information and coordinate tasks using MCP as the common language.
Wow. So they're like talking to each other.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then we might even see personalized AI assistants with really deep, secure local integrations.
So it's not just in the cloud, it's actually on your device.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then enhanced enterprise governance and security.
Right.
For AI access to internal tools.
It's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, tons.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like MCP has the potential to be a really foundational technology for the future of AI.
I think so. It's changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
It's really reshaping how we connect AI with the world.
Right.
And it's paving the way for more capable, more interactive, and more user-friendly experiences.
Awesome. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into MCP, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most exciting thing to consider is what new applications or efficiencies might be possible.
Yeah.
If every piece of software and every service could talk to AI agents.
Right.
Through a standard protocol like MCP.
So it's really about breaking down those barriers between all these different systems and enabling them to communicate seamlessly.
Yeah, imagine a world where you don't have to think about compatibility issues.
Right.
Or data formats.
Right.
It's all just plug and play.
Yeah, that's a really powerful idea.
Yeah, so I encourage everyone to check out the resources we've linked.
Absolutely.
And just think about how this could impact your own work or your hobbies or whatever you're interested in.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be following AI.
For sure.
Okay, well, thanks for joining me on this step dive.
Thanks for having me.
It was a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, I learned a lot.
Me too. Okay, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.